In the modern world, street demonstrations have become one of the most important instruments for expressing collective demands. A means through which citizens convey their voices of protest, calls for justice, and desire for change to political authorities. However, in Afghanistan, these events have often carried more complex and, at times, devastating dimensions, particularly in relation to the Hazara people, who have historically been deprived of their basic rights and have repeatedly risen in protest against these injustices. At various points in history, these people have taken to the streets to respond to injustice, discrimination, violence, and critical decisions made by governments. Some of these demonstrations, in terms of the scale of public participation, became the largest protest gatherings in the history of the country, while others, due to their tragic and bloody consequences, have remained in collective memory as among the deadliest protests. The Enlightenment Movement, Junbish-e Roshnayi, is regarded as one of the most prominent and meaningful civic movements in the contemporary history of Afghanistan. A movement that emerged from a specific demand and gradually became a symbol of awareness, the pursuit of justice, and civic participation in the country. The Two-Tap Project was one of the largest electricity infrastructure projects in Afghanistan. It was designed to transmit imported electricity from Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan into Afghanistan's power grid and, in the future, provide the foundation for connecting the regional electricity network. This project was not merely a simple energy initiative. Due to its direct impact on the economic, industrial, and infrastructural development of the provinces along its route, it held strategic importance for the future of the country. The roots of the dispute over this project went back several years. During the presidency of Hamid Karzai, the Afghan government hired the German consulting firm Fichtner to conduct feasibility studies for the Two-Tap project. After examining various options, the company recommended the Bamyan route due to technical considerations, grid stability, and its role in promoting balanced development in the central regions. These studies later became one of the most important arguments presented by the protesters. However, the Afghan government selected the Salang route as the final option, and this decision was approved in a cabinet meeting during the early months of the National Unity Government. According to movement activists, news of this decision was not officially announced at first and was later revealed through leaked information. The publication of this report sparked a wave of protests across media outlets and social networks. A large segment of society, particularly the Hazaras, viewed this decision as unjust, discriminatory, and lacking transparency. In response to this decision, a group of intellectuals, civil activists, students, and citizens, relying on peaceful civic methods, established a movement whose primary goal was to defend justice, transparency in national decision-making, and the equal right of citizens to benefit from development. The name Roshnayi, Enlightenment, was chosen symbolically, a name that referred both to electricity and represented social awareness and awakening. At the beginning, almost all Hazara political leaders, members of parliament, religious figures, and Hazara civil society organizations, including Sarwar Danish, Mohammad Mohakik, and other Hazara leaders, adopted a united position against changing the project's route and called on the public to participate in civic protests. This unity was considered one of the rare moments of political convergence among the Hazara community since 1381, 2002. In response to the protests, then-President Mohammad Ashraf Ghani claimed that the decision to change the route of the power line had been made during the government of Hamid Karzai, proposed by Mohammad Ismail Khan, and signed by Mohammad Qasim Fahim. After establishing a commission, the government announced that it would construct a secondary 220 kilovolt route from Doshi to Bamyan to provide electricity to Bamyan. However, this proposal was not accepted by the protesters. As protests continued and negotiations began, differences of opinion gradually emerged between political leaders and the main body of the movement. Some political leaders preferred continuing dialogue and accepting the solutions proposed by the government, while a large part of the activists remained committed to the original demand. As a result, many political figures gradually moved away from the front lines of the movement, and the leadership of the protests remained with the High Council of Junbish-e Roshnayi, which was composed of civil activists, academics, and social figures. Unlike many protest movements in Afghanistan, Junbish-e Roshnayi had no armed structure and no specific political affiliation. Large-scale demonstrations, civic statements, dialogue with domestic and international institutions, and the strategic use of media were the main tools of this movement, making it a rare experience of modern civic action in the country. After the High Council of Junbish-e Roshnayi announced that negotiations with the government had failed to reach an agreement, a call was issued for an open-ended demonstration on the second day of Asad. On July 23, 2016, one of the largest demonstrations in the history of Kabul took place. Thousands of supporters of the movement, most of whom had begun their march from Dashti-Barchi, took to the streets and, with slogans against discrimination, demanded the restoration of the project's route through Bamyan. To contain the demonstration and, according to the government, to ensure security, authorities placed shipping containers along various routes. As a result, the original 10 planned routes were restricted, and the final gathering of the protesters was directed toward Deh Mazang Square. At around 2:20 p.m., as protesters had gathered at Deh Mazang Square and were preparing locations for an open-ended sit-in, a massive explosion occurred among the crowd. Shortly afterward, when people rushed to help the wounded and those killed, a second explosion deepened the tragedy. On that day, Deh Mazang was transformed from a place of peaceful protest and demands for justice into one of the bloodiest scenes of violence against civilians and civic movements. This event became one of the bloodiest attacks against unarmed protesters in the history of Afghanistan. In this attack, 86 people were killed, 1,000 people sustained minor injuries, and 400 people suffered severe injuries. The explosions were so powerful that many of the victims were extremely difficult to identify, and from some victims, only a limb or fragments of their bodies remained. They lost their lives after walking a long distance, exhausted and thirsty, under the scorching heat, while peacefully seeking justice. The victims and the injured were transferred to Ibn Sina and Istiqlal hospitals, and later, some of the critically wounded were sent to India for medical treatment. Among the victims were a large number of university students, professors, doctors, engineers, journalists, and civil activists. A generation considered the intellectual capital and future of both the Hazara community and Afghanistan as a whole. For this reason, the incident dealt a heavy blow to the scientific, cultural, and social capacity of this community. The bodies of those who lost their lives were buried on a hill in Omid-e-Sabz township, which later became known as the Hill of the Junbish-e Roshnayi Martyrs. Although ISIS claimed responsibility for the attack, the incident remained regarded as one of the controversial suicide attacks and continued to raise questions. The second day of Asad was recorded as one of the darkest days in the history of the Hazara community, and this people continued to be targeted by suicide attacks in the years that followed. After the events of the second day of Asad, over time, differences of opinion regarding how to continue the movement, engagement with the government, and the pursuit of demands led to a decline in the initial cohesion of the High Council of Junbish-e Roshnayi. Nevertheless, the violent suppression of the civic movement left a deep wound on society, and Junbish-e Roshnayi received broad attention from international media and human rights organizations. Ultimately, despite its bitter and bloody ending, the Enlightenment movement, Junbish-e Roshnayi, is recognized as one of the most prominent symbols of civic advocacy, public awareness, and the pursuit of justice in contemporary Afghan history, a movement that portrayed the heavy costs of standing up for citizens' demands and engraved its name in the historical memory of the country.